UC website. So I want to introduce you to Samantha Cobble, who is with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. She's the Northeast Region Gopher Tortoise biologist, and she's going to tell us all about gopher tortoises. So you want to start sharing your screen?
Sure. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. As Melanie said, my name is Samantha Cobble, and I am the Gopher Tortoise Conservation Biologist for 9 counties in the Northeast region in Florida. I've been with the Conservation Commission for 10 years and have been doing gopher tortoise permitting and conservation work for over 9 years now. So our presentation today is going to be on the importance of gopher tortoises to the Florida ecosystem. And this is an overview of what we're going to discuss: the life history, reproduction, habitat, keystone species, legal status, etc. Gopher tortoises in the wild will typically live 40 to 60 years. There is a gopher tortoise that lives in Nova Scotia at a natural history museum, and his name is Gus, and he just recently turned 98 years old. So we don't know how long they can live in captivity. And I have also met other tortoises that were over 80 years old that were also in captivity. Their reproductive maturity is usually 9 to 21 years. Depending on how warm of an environment they're in, they tend to get reproductive age earlier. The average length is 10 to 12 inches. They do have a very low reproductivity rate, which is one of the reasons that they are a threatened species, where they only have 1 clutch per year of typically 5 to 8 eggs. And the females are usually larger than the males. These are the only land tortoise native in Florida and the only tortoise east of the Mississippi River. So gopher tortoises are adapted for burrowing. Burrowing is very important for tortoises, and you'll see some reasons why further on in the video, in the slideshow. They have a very shovel-like front foot. This allows them to dig their burrows, and a very stumpy elephantine hind foot. They have a broad head with a non-projecting snout, so it's very blunt. It's not like a snapping turtle that has a very pointy nose. Here's their stumpy back legs again. This actually helps them to pack the roof of their burrow because they can push up on their legs and use their shell to pack the top of the burrow. Here's some imagery of gopher tortoises that are adults. You can see they're mostly a gray color. Tortoises can come in a multitude of colors. I've seen them what they call blonde beach bum tortoises, where their shell is very light yellow color and also a very dark color and any color in between. And you can see that there is some variation too on the shell, and that's where the tortoise shell comes from when they used to make tortoise shell combs and other items like that. Here are hatchling and juvenile gopher tortoises. Here's a hatchling coming out of an egg. These eggs are about ping pong size, and they are a hard shell, not a leathery shell. These juveniles are usually hatch out at about 2 inches long. Here's a good picture of a hatchling gopher tortoise and a burrow associated with a hatchling tortoise. And you can see with this water bottle, that is a very small burrow. The hatchling tortoises will burrow, and they also will pallet down underneath leaves and other debris, but they can burrow. Sometimes they'll also burrow off the side of an adult burrow, inside of an adult burrow. So how old is the tortoise, and how long will it live, and how big will it get? Well, the neonates, so the new fresh hatchling tortoises, are very small, only a couple inches. They have very soft shells. They have an egg tooth, which they use to break out of the egg. And they also will have a yolk sac that is still underneath their belly. Hatchling tortoises usually will also have a yolk a scar from where that yolk sac is for a few years. They are considered a hatchling till up to about 3 years, and they are still very flexible then and very yellow. Their carapace is not yet flattened out by then. They're juveniles up into between 5 to 8 inches, up to about 5 inches we consider juveniles. And their skin starts to darken, their shell flattens, and they also start getting more dark scutes on their carapace. A subadult is anywhere between 5 and 8 inches, and usually already over 10 years old. As I said before, it takes 7 to 21 years for them to reach reproductive age. This is about the time that their shell starts to harden and their color becomes more uniform. Anytime before that, they're very susceptible to predation because of their soft shells. And adults, as I said, they can live up to, we don't know, 100 years, maybe more. And they're usually an adult about 15 years old. Their shell is very hard. Their body has a more uniform color. Now, it was thought for a very long time that gopher tortoises grow rings on their shell like a tree. So every year it was thought that that meant that that was another year for that tortoise. Now, we can use that as a rough age estimate, but we have found that gopher tortoises actually will put on additional rings just like trees in really good years where they're eating well. If they have very good forage, they may put on several rings per year. If it's a drought year and they don't have good forage, they may not put on any rings at all. So it's just sort of a good estimate of age to use that. Males and females, so gopher tortoises are dimorphic. The males are different than the females. The females have a flat plastron. The plastron is the shell on the bottom of the tortoise. It is flat down towards the anal scutes. The males actually have a concave plastron, so it is scooped in. They have anal scutes that are more of a V-shaped, and this gular projection up here tends to be longer in the males. And the males will actually use that for fighting with other males and pushing each other over. So the area where the scoop is that we call the bridge here, and you can see this is actually a male tortoise in this image here. And here's the tail and then what we call the terminal marginal. Gopher tortoises typically mate between April and June, but they have been seen to be mating year-round. They can lay eggs up until October. There has been some instances where gopher tortoises will lay eggs without burying them in a nest, and that is typically when the tortoise has a clutch of eggs that's not viable. So if you see a tortoise in January laying eggs on a driveway, it's very likely that those eggs are not viable. And here are two tortoises mating in the wild. And here's an x-ray of gopher tortoise with eggs inside. They typically have a clutch between 5 and 8 eggs, and they are about ping pong size and ping pong texture. They dig the nest about 4 to 8 inches deep, and they'll lay their eggs in that nest. They usually nest in the burrow apron, which is the sandy area in front of the burrow, but they will also pick any other sunny spot where it's easy to dig. So nest predation is a big problem. Gopher tortoise eggs are desirable by a lot of wildlife species and also the hatchlings. And I have a video here for you. So as you can see, gopher tortoises do get predated by raccoons. Their nests get predated by raccoons. Juveniles, hatchlings get predated. They also get predated by birds and possums, anything that would find a small animal like that tasty, they will get predated by. So the next topic we're going to discuss is the burrows. So gopher tortoise burrows are very specialized, and they are average of 15 feet long or 6 to 6.5 feet deep. I have seen them 20 feet deep, 40 feet long. Gopher tortoises are master excavators, and they will dig their burrow until they get to a cool area around the water table, and it stays a constant 65 degrees year round. Now, gopher tortoises dig their burrows where they can turn around completely inside of them. And I'm going to show you this video, but gopher tortoises have one entrance. This is basically the front door and the back door. They go down at about a 30 to a 45 degree angle and turn around and come back out. Okay, and so this sandy area here in front, this is what we call the burrow apron. And this is the burrow entrance. It has a very classic half moon shape, a flat bottom, and dome-like top. Gopher tortoises are adapted to survive in Florida and survive in wildfire. So as you can see here, there was a wildfire in this area, and the gopher tortoise just cleaned its burrow out and was just fine in there. A lot of other species, over 365 species, will actually use these burrows as refugia as well. And some of those species are obligates to the gopher tortoise. And here is a tortoise inside its burrow. And as you can see, this tortoise is coming out, and the burrow is wide enough that it can turn around completely inside of there. And this is what we call a gopher tortoise condominium. Gopher tortoises typically have more than one burrow. They will have up to 2 or 3 in their home range. It really depends on habitat. We've seen that in areas that flood more often, tortoises will have more than 2 burrows. In areas that don't flood as much, they only typically have 1 to 2 burrows. They do move around kind of seasonally to these different burrows. So distribution and habitat. Gopher tortoises occur in all 67 counties in Florida, but they prefer high and dry places such as longleaf pine and xeric oak sandhills. The biggest threat to their long-term survival is habitat loss. So gopher tortoises are not the only thing that wants to live in these high and dry habitats. People do too. They are listed as threatened in Florida, and west of the Tombigbee River, here in Alabama, they are actually listed as a federally protected species, federally threatened in west of the Tombigbee. They are a candidate for listing with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also. But as of right now, they're just listed as threatened in the state of Florida. In Alabama, they are a protected non-game species. So here's longleaf pine sandhill. It's a habitat that it's upland habitats. It's relatively well-drained soils for digging, herbaceous plant foods, and open sunny areas for nesting and basking. And it's very high and dry. Now, longleaf pine sandhill used to be the predominant habitat in the southeastern United States, but only 2% of native longleaf sandhill still exists. Scrub is also a habitat that gopher tortoises like. You can see a big scrub rosemary here in this picture. If you've heard of the Florida scrub jays also like scrub. This is one of the most endemic habitats in Florida, and it's mostly found in the Ocala National Forest. Pine Flatwoods is another area that gopher tortoises live. This is an area that tends to get more wet in the summertime and has low-lying palmetto, lots of herbaceous vegetation, sparse canopy, and very diverse herbaceous layer. Coastal dunes. If you've ever been over to St. Augustine and walked, the beach there, those dunes are loaded with gopher tortoises. So tortoises are not the only animal that likes to live in the beach. Of course, we do too. So there's lots of gopher tortoises over on the dunes, and that's a habitat that they're also losing. Disturbed sites. So gopher tortoises sometimes are not very picky about where they live. If their habitat gets destroyed, they'll sometimes move right back in. And if the area has been cleared and left to return to just disturbed vegetation, they'll move right back in. It's just not desirable habitat. Other habitats, including your backyard. Gopher tortoises will live in backyards. They will live in neighborhoods. We actually do want to keep them distributed throughout Florida. So it will be common to see gopher tortoises living in neighborhoods, and we do want the citizens of Florida to just coexist with them. Roadsides, gopher tortoises do sometimes inhabit roadsides, and this is very risky for them because they are subject to roadkill, unfortunately. Domestic pets can be a big issue for gopher tortoises, so I do ask the citizens to keep their pets away from gopher tortoises and just watch from afar. So cemeteries are very calm, and they're not really bothered in cemeteries, so we do find that gopher tortoises will inhabit cemeteries, and this tortoise unfortunately dug under this headstone. So if they're not causing any damage, we just leave them alone and let them be there. Forage. So gopher tortoises like herbaceous forage. They like low-lying soft plants. And we have a gopher tortoise friendly plant guide on our website. We actually have a lot of good information about gopher tortoises on our website, but you can find a very comprehensive guide to tortoise friendly plants at this website here, and it's classified by region type, nutritional value, and you can find plants to plant in your yard. So tortoises can have nice forage. Here's some examples of good gopher tortoise forage. These are native plants. This prickly pear cactus, they will take a bite right out of this prickly pear cactus and also eat the cactus fruits. And they also eat other low-lying plants like thistle. They're not bothered by the spines like we are. Tortoises are very curious too. As you can see in this photo, that tortoise is attracted to this glass bottle. I've seen gopher tortoises eat bird eggs, ground nesting bird eggs. I've also seen them eat dead fish on the beach. So I don't know if maybe that tortoise was just needing some more nutrients, more protein, but they are curious, and they will test out different things to eat, especially if it's shiny or colorful. There's a gopher tortoise. Their home range is where they go in the course of a day. The area can vary seasonally. To give you an idea on size, a 1/4 acre is the average house lot, and males tend to have a larger range than females. They do tend to stay closer to their burrow, except for when they're going out and foraging. The adult females tend to have a 0.2 to a 1.5 acre home range, and the males can have up to a 3 acre home range. And the juveniles usually stay under an acre. Gopher tortoises are a keystone species. A keystone species means that they are a species that by protecting them, it also protects a lot of other species, and that their habitat protects other species as well. They're keystone species because their burrows average 15 feet long. And like I said, over 350 other species use their burrows. And loss of the gopher tortoise would result in a dramatic ecological shift in Florida, unfortunately. Oops. This is a nice example of what you can find inside of a gopher tortoise burrow. Now, all these animals might not be in there at the same time, but as you see, there are some commensals, and commensals mean that they rely on the gopher tortoise burrow for housing or reproduction. There's some casual visitors like skunks and rattlesnakes and armadillos. We see armadillo tracks quite frequently in gopher tortoise burrows. There's also a cave cricket, which is specific to gopher tortoise burrows. And then we have obligates, and these obligates, like the gopher tortoise tick, is specific to gopher tortoises. It can also bite humans, but it's pretty rare. And then also the dung beetle, it feeds on the gopher tortoise droppings. Here's a Florida mouse. Florida mice are one of the commensal species for gopher tortoises. They were recently delisted in Florida, and we are going to have some permitting guidelines for them for habitat, take of habitat. Here's a gopher frog. Gopher frogs will inhabit gopher tortoise burrows, especially if there is nearby ponds that they can breed. And the eastern indigo snake. The eastern indigo snake is a federally listed species. It's threatened, and this is a very protected and very rare snake. And the eastern diamondback is not protected, but it is a snake that inhabits gopher tortoise burrows occasionally. And the Florida pine snake. This is a fossorial species, which means they live underground, mostly in gopher burrows, so pocket gopher burrows, but they also go in gopher tortoise burrows. So here's a really good video I wanted to share. It is a little bit, it's 4 minutes long, but I think you'll appreciate it. It is done by one of our favorite naturalists, David Attenborough.
It's midsummer, it's nearly midday, and it's very, very hot. And as a consequence, I'm sweating. Sweating is a direct response to heat that only mammals can do. No reptile like this gopher tortoise has got sweat glands. Instead, you've got another way of keeping itself cool. Most reptiles head for the shade when it gets too hot. To see where this gopher tortoise is heading here in Florida, I'm going to use this. A remotely controlled mini camera on wheels with its own lights. It can go pretty well anywhere. The gopher tortoise is heading for home. And with luck, I'll be able to follow it, the tortoise, as it goes down into its burrow. And that camera has also got a thermometer mounted on it. Already, I can see the temperature is beginning to drop. The further down the burrow we go, the cooler it gets. Now, where's the tortoise? There it is. Right behind. We're now a couple of meters in, but the burrow could go on for some 50 feet, 17 meters. And it's all been built by this tortoise. Well, that is not a tortoise, that's a rattlesnake. Obviously, taking shelter from the heat, just as the tortoise is. The tortoise is so well armored, it's in no danger from the snake, and gopher tortoises don't seem to mind sharing their burrows. Changed its mind. There's its rattle. Over 100 different species of animal have been recorded taking shelter inside tortoise tunnels. In fact, some can live nowhere else. But there's another reason why tortoises' homes are so popular. Tortoises are one of the few animals here that can actually dig. Each may have more than one burrow within its territory, and that's very valuable because they have to deal with an even greater danger than sunstroke. Bushfires. These are a major and recurrent threat to all the animals that live here. Tortoise tunnels are invaluable places in which to take refuge. Gopher tortoises may seem to be unassuming creatures, but their engineering skills are essential for the survival of the whole ecosystem. Ground is still smoking, but the flames have passed. The emergency is over. So by digging tunnels, tortoises save not only their lives, but the lives of hundreds of other animals. But tunnels aren't the only place where you can escape extremes of temperature. There's another.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay, I love that video. David Attenborough is a very good naturalist, and of course, you know, we're very familiar with his voice and his work. That video shows a rattlesnake in the burrow. It's not as common as it looks. It's actually pretty rare to see rattlesnakes in gopher tortoise burrows, and just because you have a gopher tortoise burrow does not mean you're going to get snakes. So, mentioned the legal status of gopher tortoises before. They are listed as threatened in the state of Florida, and they are federally listed west of the Tombigbee River. So, and they are candidate for listing by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Some history on gopher tortoises. The status, they were listed as threatened in 1975, and it was changed to species of special concern in 1978. Harvest has been prohibited since 1988. Gopher tortoises were actually a game species, and there was a bag limit of up to 3 tortoises per day until 1988. If you've ever heard of the term Hoover chickens, that there would be a chicken in every pot, in the South, the folks were so poor that that was actually what they ate were gopher tortoises. That was one of the few sources of protein that were easy to find. They were listed as threatened again in 2007, and that is when FWC wrote the Gopher Tortoise Management Plan. We also, in 2009, we published the Gopher Tortoise Permitting Guidelines, which requires that gopher tortoises be relocated from development. All tortoises be relocated from development. There are many impacts to gopher tortoises. The biggest impact is habitat loss, and they are in decline. So we have some lots of problems with that and a few solutions. So this imagery here is a cultural festival that used to occur. It was gopher tortoise races, and they would actually use real gopher tortoises and paint their shells. It's detrimental to paint a gopher tortoise's shell because they do use their shell to absorb heat, and they need that to process their food and also, you know, create calcium and vitamin D. So they now use this type of thing over here, which is actually a mechanical gopher tortoise. And they would go out and they would capture these live tortoises, and then they would not take them back to where they were found them. So that was one of the reasons that was a very bad practice also. As I said, harvest of gopher tortoises, this still does occur. It is illegal in the state of Florida to capture gopher tortoises for food source, but it does still occur. Domestic dogs attack gopher tortoises very frequently, and if you ever talk to any of the rehabbers in Florida, they will tell you that domestic dogs are one of the biggest predators of gopher tortoises, and they get a lot of tortoises with injuries. Gopher tortoises also get a disease called upper respiratory tract disease. It's not zoonotic, so it does not spread to humans, but it can make the tortoises very sick, and it can also kill off some of the population. And the typical symptoms of upper respiratory tract disease is basically a runny nose, red swollen eyes, a sunken appearance. Habitat loss is their biggest threat in Florida right now. It's estimated that more than 80% of original longleaf pine forest in the southeast has been lost. I think it's actually closer to 98%. Uplands are converting to housing development. Tortoises are not the only ones that want to live in a high and dry area. There are also pine plantations, phosphate mines, agriculture fields. These habitat loss actually can result in direct take of tortoises. And pavement's not really suitable for tortoises to live on. Unsustainable forestry practices, clear cutting, intensive forestry is not conducive for gopher tortoises. This paper plantation here, these pines are being grown for paper production, and that just shades out all available understory. This is some pictures of phosphate mines in Central Florida, and as you can see, it does not leave any habitat for tortoises or any other animals for that matter. Now, agriculture, row cropping, and intensive agriculture doesn't leave habitat for tortoises. Invasive species, this is imagery of Kogan grass. So Kogan grass is a very thick, dense grass and will take over very quickly and is extremely hard to get rid of. So this takes over all herbaceous understory vegetation that the tortoises could be foraging in. Roadsides are detrimental to tortoises. Tortoises don't really know when a car is coming, and if one comes near them, they may just hunker down and not exactly run out of the way. So road mortality is a big issue for tortoises. It also fragments tortoises' habitat, so the tortoises cannot move between habitats. Habitat degradation is another issue with gopher tortoises. This is an imagery of a pine, longleaf pine forest that has just become overgrown due to lack of fire. Politics also play a role in threatened and endangered species protections. So what can we do to protect this species? There are actually lots of things we can do as citizens to help a gopher tortoise. We have a research institute with FWC, and it's called Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, and they do gopher tortoise research. We also do surveying on native lands, and we also survey areas where they've been relocated to see how they're doing. And this is some imagery of just taking some measurements of gopher tortoises here. It's easiest to put them upside down when we do these measurements because then they can't run away. You can become tortoise wise, like we discussed earlier. You can landscape with native plants, and we have that native plant list. You can become active in conservation organizations. FWC has volunteer opportunities with the Gopher Tortoise program. There's also the Gopher Tortoise Council, which is a really good organization for protection of gopher tortoises. And be a watchdog for tortoises. We have a smartphone app or web application that you can use to take pictures of gopher tortoises, and they would get uploaded to around the area that they were found. We have a mortality database where you can submit mortalities, especially roadside mortalities. We're very interested in that. And also you can also write to your local leaders to encourage conservation of tortoises and all threatened species in the state. This is what not to do if you find a stray tortoise. So if you are out and about and you find a gopher tortoise walking around, please just leave it alone and let it go on its way. You can observe it from a safe distance as long as you're not forcing it to run away. Please don't pick them up, or please don't put them in your car and take them down the road. That's very important. We get lots of calls where folks have found a gopher tortoise and they didn't know what to do, so they put it in the car and they took it home, and we just want you to leave them where they're at. They have a very strong homing instinct and they will try and get back to their burrow. If you see a gopher tortoise crossing the road, you can move it to the nearest habitat in the direction it was headed. Typically it is going across the road to get to its burrow or its foraging area. If you do find an injured tortoise, you can call our wildlife alert hotline or our local FWC office if it's during business hours, and get some name and phone number of some gopher tortoise rehabbers. Here's some links. So for more information, we have our Gopher Tortoise website here for FWC. It has a plethora of information. Gopher Tortoise Council, Defenders of Wildlife, and then for volunteer opportunities, that GT events web email is a good contact. I am the Northeast Region Gopher Tortoise Conservation Biologist, so I cover 9 counties in the Northeast region, but there are 4 of us Gopher Tortoise biologists throughout the state, and these are the phone numbers for whichever county you're in for that to contact the regional contacts about gopher tortoises in our regional office. So that concludes our presentation. I will go back and we can look at the questions, and thank you very much for attending the presentation today.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to read out the questions. Let me, okay. Dorian asks, I have a gopher tortoise living in my yard, and I'm wondering if it is okay to feed it fruit or veggies sometimes, or should I not feed it?
So we get this question pretty frequently, and we do ask that you don't feed the gopher tortoises. One of the reasons for that is that we are changing their natural behavior by feeding them. So if we feed them fruits and vegetables, of course they may like a lot of those fruits and vegetables, but they'll be coming back and trying to get fed. Instead, we want them to go out and eat native plants in the area to make sure that they get all the vitamins and minerals that they need. So planting tortoise-friendly plants is really, if you want to feed the tortoises, that's what we would love to see, is just more tortoise-friendly plants.
Okay. What is the difference between a tortoise and a turtle? Pam asks.
Okay, that's a very good question. So turtles, every tortoise is a turtle, but not every turtle is a tortoise, okay? So what that means is that tortoises are land animals. So they live on the land, they don't swim in the water. Tortoises can swim a little bit, but they do not commonly swim in the lake. So if you find a tortoise, don't go throw them in the lake or in the ocean. Turtles are usually water animals. They usually live in and around water, except for the box turtle is a terrestrial turtle. So, and their feet also look different. So the gopher tortoise had that shovel-like front foot and those elephantine back legs. Turtles have more of a flat, both legs are made for swimming with webbed toes.
Okay, thanks. Shelley and Lamont ask, what is considered normal density for tortoises per acre?
Well, that's a good question. It really depends on habitat. We found that it's usually about 1 tortoise per 2 acres is normal wild densities. It depends on where they're at. If they're in an area where development is very high development and there's not a lot of native land left, those tortoises will congregate on empty lots and become quite congested. So we have found burrows, 10, 20 burrows on an acre lot sometimes, but that's usually because there's not enough habitat nearby.
And Larry asks, with the destruction of their food source after a major fire, do they typically migrate or try to stay near their established burrow?
That's a really good question. So in Florida, our vegetation growth is very quick here. It could be just a matter of a week or two when the vegetation starts coming back in a major fire area. Tortoises do typically stay in their established burrow while the habitat is growing back. Mm-hmm. So they do have two different burrows, and they may go to the other one, but it's usually not that far away and has probably already been impacted by fire as well. Gopher tortoises during the winter can stay in their burrows for quite some time without eating. So tortoises do live a long time, and one of the reasons is they have a very slow metabolism.
Okay. Someone said, I saw one recently walking along a rural driveway and was amazed by how many mosquitoes were around its head. Can the mosquitoes even penetrate the tortoise's skin, or were they just foolishly optimistic, attracted to its heat?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I do know that tortoises can be bitten by ticks and mites, so I would imagine a mosquito may be able to penetrate really soft skin, especially around their eyes. But that's a good question. I'll have to look into that.
Marion asks, is there any movement to establish critical habitat for tortoises?
Yes, actually, we permit gopher tortoise relocation for construction projects. Now, these tortoises that are permitted and relocated are actually moved to what we call recipient sites. These recipient sites are either publicly or privately owned land that is set aside for gopher tortoises and is protected with a conservation easement and will perpetually be managed for gopher tortoise habitat and never developed. So we are definitely setting aside land for gopher tortoises.
Okay, and Samantha asks, what are the laws for developers and building where there are burrows?
If there are burrows in a development area, they are required to get surveys conducted, obtain permits to relocate the tortoises, and have the tortoises relocated prior to any construction taking place or any clearing. That is state law.
Bonnie asks, what is the range of a male gopher tortoise? How far do they go from their burrows?
We found that it's about an average of 3.2 acres.
Jonathan asks, I have a gopher tortoise in my backyard. One of its burrows has not been used in a long time. When is it okay to fill it up with dirt?
Okay, that's another great question. So gopher tortoise burrows are protected by state law when they are considered potentially occupied. A potentially occupied is going to be half moon shaped, and it's going to be open where the tunnel is open, the bottom is flat. It can have hard packed sand in the front or soft sand. As long as it has that open gopher tortoise shape, it is protected by state law. When that burrow starts to fill with vegetation and it collapses in, it's then considered abandoned and it's no longer protected by state law. So if a gopher tortoise leaves the burrow, it does take a little while for it to become abandoned. Over time, it will look more abandoned with heavy rains and vegetation growth.
Okay. Janet asks, if a gopher tortoise is just displaced, will it take over another tortoise's burrow?
Sure, yes, especially if it's a bigger tortoise, they can be territorial, and so they will kick another smaller tortoise out of its burrow and take it over.
Susan says, I had a tortoise living in my yard for about a year, and then it moved to the other side of the yard and is now completely in my neighbor's yard. Do they frequently move like that?
It's really dependent on the tortoise. I've heard of tortoises living in the same burrow for 20 years or 3 months. It really just depends on the gopher tortoise.
Marion says, I've seen a tortoise stay for days in a flooded burrow. Is this detrimental to the tortoise?
That's interesting. So there's actually a video where they put a camera on a flooded gopher tortoise burrow to watch what happened with the tortoise. And the tortoise actually would come up out of every 10 minutes or so, take a breath, and then go back down in the burrow. So tortoises will live in those flooded burrows, absolutely. And they are safe. You know, we joke about giving them little snorkels, but they come up every so often and take a breath. And like I said, they have a really slow metabolism, so they can hold their breath for a while. And there's also, depending on the burrow, it could have, you know, deep in the burrow, it could have like another chamber that goes up where there's an air pocket. We don't know.
Virginia asks, is it safe to walk near a burrow? Attenborough seems to be sitting really close to the burrow in the video.
Right, so we don't want to get too close to the burrow because we don't want to bother the tortoise, and the burrow itself is actually protected by state law, but it is safe to walk near them. You don't want to walk over the immediate top of it because the burrow may collapse. But yes, you could walk near the burrow. You don't want to walk in the apron because there may be eggs in the apron.
Okay, a couple of people asked again how to tell gender, but you went through that. We will be posting this video on the Passionflower website. So after a day or two, check the website and there should be a recording of the whole program so you can watch it again. Let's see. Dorian asked, do they mate for life?
Yeah, so gopher tortoises don't mate for life. The males will actually compete with each other to try and get a female's attention. They'll try and flip each other over and they'll try and push each other away. The females, you know, if she's interested in a male, she may mate with him. If she's not interested, she may just walk away and he may try to pursue her, you know, follow her around for a couple days, sit outside of her burrow. They don't mate for life. We really don't. Typically, they will just mate and lay their eggs at one time, and that's it for that year. So just the lucky male that gets her attention, I guess.
Zoe, Dante, and Colleen ask, how tough is their shell?
Their shell, when they're an adult, is very tough. It is made of keratin. It's the same kind of material that your hair is made out of. It is very hard shell. So, as an adult, when they are young, their shells are still pretty soft because they're growing still.
Lorian asks, what are the main ways gopher tortoises communicate? Head bobbing, any vocalizations?
Yeah, gopher tortoises will hiss. They'll hiss at each other, the head bobbing, and the males actually have glands underneath their chin that produce pheromones.
Nicole asks, are those grandfathered incidental take permits still allowed? Where grandfathered permit holders, developers are allowed to fill in burrows, not relocate tortoises?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the incidental take permits, most of them did not have an expiration date, but they are using humane relocation. So every single one of those folks that have those incidental take permits, 99% of the time will actually do humane relocation. So they'll contact an authorized gopher tortoise agent to come out and do a survey. They'll excavate the burrows and they'll take those tortoises off those sites and take them to a protected recipient site.
Janet asks, what is the hotline number?
Okay, so the hotline number is 888-404-3922, or FWCC is the last four, 3922. So if you have a gopher tortoise that's been injured, you can call the hotline and they can give you some rehabber numbers. Or if you if you know that gopher tortoise burrows are being impacted by development, you can call the Wildlife Alert Hotline as well.
Okay, and Jack asks, what is the smartphone app?
So we have an app for gopher tortoises that actually allows you to take pictures of gopher tortoises, and it gets uploaded to a map, and it's got a nice little quiz on it and where you can answer some questions, and it's got a lot of information about gopher tortoises in the app. And you can find that information on our website. I think they're moving it to more of a web-based platform pretty soon.
Great. And Rochelle asks, a gopher tortoise recently dug a burrow under our house. I'm assuming that's okay. They don't bust pipes or foundations?
No, so gopher tortoises will dig their burrows the size of the gopher tortoise, so the width is the length of the tortoise. It'll go down at about a 30 to 45 degree angle, and it'll stay that size all the way down. It does have an area at the bottom where they can turn around, but they don't make a big cavern. It's not going to cause a sinkhole, and we've never heard of it causing issues with foundations. Sometimes they do expose some pipes. If you do have questions or you're concerned, we have a gopher tortoise assistance biologist in Tallahassee, and you can give him a call and discuss it with him.
Jonathan asked, do they compete over territory?
Absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm.
What happens, like they fight, what happens to the loser? Does he move?
Yeah, he'll have to go off and find another burrow or dig himself another burrow. Sometimes the larger tortoise will come in and kick a smaller tortoise out of their burrow, or they'll even wedge themselves in the front of the burrow and not allow that other tortoise to get out, especially during mating season.
And Cheryl and Lamont ask, is there a charge for surveys or relocation?
So gopher tortoise relocations that occur for construction sites require surveys and relocation, and FWC permits those activities. Those activities are conducted by environmental consultants that are permitted through FWC as authorized gopher tortoise agents. So the environmental consulting firms are private businesses, and they do charge fees.